All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this workshop today with Amy Gardner. I am so looking forward to hearing her tips on re-engaging and leading both hybrid and remote teams during this very interesting world of work that we're in. I'm going to start with just a quick intro to Amy, and then I will hand it over to her. Amy is a certified career transitions coach and a team development leadership coach with Apochromatik. She coaches lawyers and other professionals one-on-one in small groups and delivers workshops for all employers. Her work draws on her unique experience as Dean of Students at the law school and as a successful career practicing law. She received her bachelor's from Luther College and her JD from Chicago Law School, as well as her master's in public policy administration from Northwestern. Her service to the university is many. It's included serving as president of the Alumni Club of Chicago, vice president of the Alumni Board of Governors, and she's been recognized by her receipt of the Young Alumni Service Award. We're so grateful for everything that Amy does for the university community. And on top of all of that, her career and goal achievement advice has been featured in media, including ABA publications, Bustle, Corporate, Glassdoor, Health, Monster, NBC, and Women's Running Magazine. So without further ado, it's certainly time for me to mute myself and hand the mic over to Amy.
Thank you, Sam. And thank you everybody for joining us today. So as Sam referenced, this is going to be very interactive. We recently recorded a video, actually, I guess it was several months ago, we recorded a video that was comparing having your video off on Zoom to having a paper bag over your head. So just as you wouldn't go to an important work meeting with a paper bag over your head, we hope that you will turn on your camera today. And some of the activities we're doing will require you actually to do that to be able to participate. So I hope you'll turn your cameras on. Before we jump into content, I want to start with one quick way that you can use to engage your own team, and that's to use a tool called menti.com. And my partner Keith is with me today, and he's going to be helping me with this tool as well as some of the others that we'll be using. So what we want to invite you to do is open up a different additional screen in your browser and type in menti.com. It's MENTI.com. And when you get to Menti, it's going to have a spot for you to type in a code. And hopefully Keith is going to share with us what that code is, and then we'll be able to type that in, and you'll have a question listed on that screen. And the question is going to ask you, what 2 words come to mind when you think virtual meeting? And now obviously we're going to talk about a lot more than virtual meetings, but the question for you to start with is, what 2 words come to mind when you hear virtual meeting? And so when you get to menti.com, the code that you need to type in is on the screen in front of you now, and we'll add that to the chat as well. Keith already has it. There we go. So just type in that code of 88540138. Menti is a great way to get people engaged and to allow them to have input anonymously. So nobody can see what you're sharing in this. And as you'll see, the words get larger based on how many times they are submitted. So far we have words coming up with Zoom fatigue. Yes, that's definitely a real thing, isn't it? Draining, awkward, been there, done that. Sounds like somebody who's ready to be back in person. Difficult, equalizer. Yeah, there's been a lot of research about that, right? That being on virtual meetings can get rid of some of the issues that we see when people are in person. Frequent, yep, let's see, disconnected, fatigue, convenient. Yeah, I'm in a number of networking groups that meet at 7 or 7:30 a.m. And I gotta say, I am loving the convenience of just logging onto the computer rather than needing to Uber across the loop. Let's see, what else do we have? Alternative, multitasking. That goes right with another word I see, which is distracted. Protected. All right, alternative, silence. Okay, I'm guessing that's from somebody who hasn't had a lot of participation in their virtual meetings. If that's the case, you're going to love our content today, because we're going to help you address that. No body language. Yes, as we'll talk about, that is definitely something to keep in mind, that you don't have the advantage of seeing other people's body language when you're in those virtual meetings. Good. Well, again, menti.com is a great tool that you can use in virtual meetings if you're having trouble getting people engaged or want to give people the option to engage anonymously. And unlike a Zoom poll, which we'll use in a little bit, people can as you saw, share their own thoughts. You don't have to limit them to 10 different choices. And you can also use this to then make a slide or a graphic for the team, because it pops out that word cloud for you so easily. So as I said, we're going to talk about a lot more than virtual meetings, but we start there because they're the primary way that we're interacting with our teams these days. So as you heard, I'm Amy Gardner with Apochromatik. I'm a recovering attorney and former dean of students at the law school. I have dual coaching certifications in both individual coaching and team and leadership coaching. I help teams get more engaged and better aligned, as well as work with attorneys one-on-one in our small group attorney masterminds and in one-on-one coaching to help them advance in their current career or develop the tools that they want to be able to transition within law or outside law. So why am I talking to you about remote and hybrid teams today? Well, in addition to the training and experience working with teams as a coaching consultant, I actually worked remotely in my very first job out of college. And it was so long ago that on my first day, they actually gave me a pager, and I was not a doctor. So this was a very long time ago. After being part of a remote team and managing a team of volunteers all across Eastern Iowa, I then went to law school at the U of C. When I graduated from law school, I worked remotely occasionally when I was practicing. And then in 2016, I started leading a hybrid team. So the members of my team were located literally from Washington State to Washington, DC. And my boss was in Washington, DC, and that's where the organization was based that we all worked for. And I was working from Chicago. Over the course of those 2 years managing staff who I maybe saw 4 or 6 weeks a year, and working for a boss who I saw a little bit less than that, I learned a lot about what to do and what not to do in managing a remote or a hybrid team. And at Apochromatik, our team has always worked remotely. So all of this is by way of saying that if there is a mistake that you can make managing a remote or hybrid team, I have probably made it or seen it or both. And there's a lot more that goes into running a sustainable and engaged remote or hybrid team than all that initial advice that we were getting a year ago. Remember last March, everybody was just concerned about, like, where do you find a standing desk? Amazon sold out of headsets. I can't get a ring light. Now we're past the sort of survival mode and getting things set up and really trying to think about how do we keep everybody engaged and make this more sustainable. So let's go to some slides. There we go. Okay. So why does all this matter? Well, we know just in our heads that if you have better, more engaged employees, you're going to have more productivity, you're going to have more profit, you're going to have more client satisfaction. Well, that's pretty obvious, right? But what you may not know are these numbers that I'm sharing with you. The estimated annual cost of employee disengagement to the US economy before the pandemic was $450 to $500 billion per year. And McLean & Company has estimated that just one disengaged employee can cost an employer up to $3,400 per year for every $10,000 in salary they make. Right, so we're talking about a third of a person's salary is basically being wasted if they are not engaged. And we know that 67% of American workers were unengaged before the pandemic. So we know that this was a problem before the pandemic. And we know that it's actually worse now. So if there are always disengaged workers, why are we talking about this now? Well, 94% of employers are saying that productivity is the same or even up among remote workers. So you probably saw these headlines a few months ago when that research came out. It was all, everything's going great, right? Remote workers are doing fine. Well, not so much, because the problem is that 67% of employers say productivity is the same as it was before the pandemic. That's a problem when you learn that next number. Remote employees are working 3+ hours more per day than they were before the pandemic. So people are working a lot more, yet in most cases, or majority of cases, it's to maintain productivity at the same level. Unsurprisingly, 58% of all workers are burned out, And that's an increase even since a few months ago, when 45% of all workers reported being burned out last fall. Nearly half of American workers who are burned out attribute it to their workload, while about 40% say they're taxed from balancing work and personal life. And I do want to acknowledge that the problems and the statistics are worse among women. Women are more stressed, more likely to say that they're worried their income is going to suffer as a result of the pandemic and everything going on around us, and more worried that they may have to put themselves at risk because they can't afford to stay home. In fact, when you look at the statistics for who's exiting the job market right now, we're seeing the numbers are by and large women, and in particular, women of color. So beyond the statistics, all of this is impacting you and your coworkers as people and as professionals. So if you just check out the cartoon on the screen, the point of this cartoon is to say that people are dealing with a lot, right? And so when you're trying to lead a meeting, you have no idea what is going on in the heads of the people that you are working with. Just as we see this cartoon character taking the fact no one is listening to him to mean, it's a great reflection on his soul and his value as a human being, rather than the fact that he was on mute. So we know it's a problem, and so today we're going to talk about what to do about it. I'm going to share some special considerations for hybrid teams, 6 strategies to engage and reinvigorate your remote or hybrid team. And then if we have time, we'll discuss some special considerations for leading on video. Now, some of you who've attended my webinars before know that I hate having to take notes when you're trying to eat lunch. So we do have a takeaway sheet ready for you so that you don't have to try to scribble things down. If you go to aposignup.com/teams, you can download that sheet. And if you have particular questions or challenges in leading your remote or hybrid team that you don't want to share with the group today, you can request a free call to do that on that website. Now, I do want to preface the strategies I'm going to share with you today by saying that these are things that Apochromatik does with teams at firms, corporations, and nonprofits. And the things that we're talking about today, I don't want anybody to feel like, that doesn't apply to me. We work with teams literally from, I think the smallest team we've worked with in the last few months is probably 6 people, up to teams at Fortune 200 companies. So these are things that work. And I encourage you to approach the strategies I'm going to share in terms of thinking about what is one or two things that I could start to implement right away. All right. So don't try to make yourself think about how am I going to change all of these things with my team. Think about what you can do that would be practical for you to start with now. So as I mentioned before, I'm going to ask you to engage today, and we're going to use a variety of ways to do that. And I hope that you will use these techniques with your own team, if nothing else, just to make all of those Zoom meetings we have a little bit more interesting and interactive. So I want to give everyone the chance to get involved. Some of you may have done scavenger hunts when you were a kid. Let's see. How many of you did scavenger hunts as a kid? Okay, a few. All right, good deal. So you may be pros at this, but this is set up so that nobody has an advantage or disadvantage in terms of how quickly they can run through their house to grab things, because you're only going to have 5 seconds. So take a minute and look and see what's around your desk. And what I'm going to ask you to do is hold something up to your camera for each of the 3 categories. We're going to do this 3 different times, and you'll have just 5 seconds to grab something. So assess what you have. And first, because it is the University of Chicago, I'd like you to hold up something that is maroon, but we'll take red. So you have maroon, something maroon or red. You have 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And let's see, what do we have? So I see Keith and Sam, who did not know this was coming already. Anthony, what is that, Anthony? Do you want to take yourself off mute and tell us?
It's a mythological symbol from Japan.
Okay, so we have culture and red all together with Anthony's contribution.
Right.
Cool. Julie, what do you have removed before? What is that? OSS, and then I saw remove before flight.
Yeah, we went to iFly, where you float above high-powered fans, and this was one thing that they give you if you survive.
if you survive. Okay, I hope they go through a lot of those. All right, let's do a second one. Let's hold up something that is sharp. So you have 5 seconds for something sharp. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Jessica. I'm a little afraid of Jessica. Jessica, what do you have there? It looks like a huge knife.
Well, that's because unbeknownst to you guys, since my background looks so beautiful, I'm actually in my kitchen.
Okay, that makes you feel a little better.
Right? That's not just on my work desk.
Yeah, good deal. All right. Steve, how about you?
Just
is
a Swiss Army knife that happened to
Okay.
be next to me in my drawer.
All right. And I see, so Julie has some scissors. Keith has a knife as well. What else? Cecilia, what do you have?
A paper cut, just a cutter. It's a cutter.
What is it?
A cutter.
Like a whatchamacallit, like a, for cutting paper?
Yeah.
Or like doing crafts?
Box cutter.
Box cutter. Okay. Wow, everybody's well armed. Anybody else want to share what you have? Jalissa, how about you? What did you have? Look like, yeah. So those are, you even had red covered, right? Because I think they're red handled scissors.
Mhm.
Yep. Nice work. You are well prepared. All right, let's do one more. Let's make it something that reflects how you're feeling about remote work. All right, so something that reflects how you're feeling about remote work. You have 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And oh, it looks like people are taking a little longer, so I'll give you guys a little second more. Oh, I see a mask. I see headphones. I see phones. Okay. So what we'd like to do is go into some breakout rooms. We'll have 3 to 4 people, and you'll have about 5 minutes. So everybody will have about a minute to share. And the idea is introduce yourself, talk who you are, where you're from, what you do, and share your object. And you'll have about 1 minute per person to do that, like I said. So 3 to 4 people, about 5 minutes. And so that you avoid that awkward time where nobody wants to go, the person who has the shiniest object is going to go first, and they're going to be responsible for keeping time. It's always exciting as the groups start to come back, because then that means we haven't lost anyone in Zoom outer space, which is always my big fear when we send people into breakout groups. But how many of you have been using breakout groups with your team? Okay, so if you haven't, it can be a great way, even if you just do it in pairs, if you have a smaller team, to get people sharing and getting to know each other a little bit better. So if you do try to do an exercise like that with your team, one thing I just want to point out is we start with, we do that exercise a lot with groups, and we always start with something really easy, right? So something red or maroon or whatever it is, you want to start with something that doesn't feel too personal. You know, nobody's going to be weirded out sharing their red pen or their red mug, right? And then the third item that we went to then was a little bit more personal, something that reflects how you feel about remote work. And then that's the item that you have people share in small groups. And you can ask people to share in front of the larger group if you have a smaller team, but it can take a lot of time. And we tend to go toward exercises that allow you to get people engaged, help people build relationships within the team, but not take a ton of time, so people don't feel like it's, you know, forced bonding or forced fun. So any questions about that exercise or Mentimeter or anything we've talked about so far? Okay, so hopefully now you've gotten to know a couple people in the group. Let's go to a poll so that everyone can weigh in. Now, as I said before, Zoom polls are great. They're anonymous, but you can only give people up to 10 options, which is why sometimes Mentimeter makes more sense. With this one, there are 5 questions. So you want to make sure you scroll down and answer all 5 of them. So for those of you who don't use Zoom polls, it tells you as you're going through how many people have reported or voted, which I always think of as precincts reporting, but. All right. So we've got about 86% of people voting. So I'll give everybody just one more second and then we'll share the results with you.
The results are up, Amy.
Yep, thank you. So it looks like just about everybody, 2/3 of the group is 100% remote right now, but by the end of this year, expected to be hybrid, where some people are in person, some people are remote, and we're 81% of us are currently 100% remote with 20% being hybrid. And if you're permitted to choose, 81% would choose a hybrid arrangement, 20% 100% remote. And people are saying that engagement, 50% of people say engagement has stayed the same. 40% say that it has decreased since this all started just a little over a year ago. So thank you for sharing that. Let me close that out. And hop back to our slides. Okay, so we shared a poll. So before we move into the 6 strategies, we want to talk about special considerations for hybrid teams, particularly because so many of you are anticipating that's the direction your workplace is going to go. So when I'm referring to a hybrid team, I'm referring to a team where some members are remote, others are in person, and it might be the same people who are working in the office sometimes and outside the office sometimes, or it might be a team where certain people are always in the office and others are always remote. So it's important to recognize that the people who are remote will be convinced that those who are in person have an advantage. This is just human nature, right? They're going to assume that by being in the office, some of their colleagues have an advantage. And the flip side of that is the people who are going into the office can feel resentful of the people who are remote. In some ways, that actually means that it's easier if everyone is given the option to be both. And we know that that's not always the case, right? If your job is to check the mail, you can't really do that remotely. But the more that you can as the team leader set it up so that people have options, the less resentment and competition and issues that you're going to deal with in terms of people being jealous or feeling left out. In order to have everyone engaged, it's really important that you think through the office setup. And what I mean by that is who is going to have offices, how the conference rooms are set up as we move towards having more people be on video meetings and not be in the room, how you'll schedule people who are in the office. And then once you figure out who's going to be in the office when, you need to think through how you want people to use their time when they're in the office. What I've seen from my experience is it's a lot better to have people engaged with each other when they're in the office than have them just treat it as just another day when they happen to have changed where they're sitting. So what I mean by that is if you have team members who every Thursday have meetings all day, that may or may not be a day to have people be in the office, right? If they're having meetings with outsiders on video anyway, it's probably not worth the time to have them come in and sit in their office just to be on video. So let me give you an example of how some of this shakes out. When I was running a hybrid team, the team in DC had a brand new office space and great technology, but the video camera in the conference room was close up to the ceiling. So what that meant was that for meetings, I was literally like looking down on everyone. And that is not a great setup if you want people who are not in the office during the meeting to feel engaged and to feel like an equal. Now, there's an easy fix for this, which is just to have everybody people who are in the conference room log on from their laptops into the meeting the same, or you, at the very least, lower the camera. Another weird issue with hybrid meetings that you might have to think about, or hybrid teams that you have to think about that you wouldn't otherwise, is remember that you need everything in the office to be working and to put as much effort into that as you do into making sure that the people who are remote have the technology they need. So for example, in the hybrid team I was running, I had to put it in my calendar to remind someone in the office to go clean off the video camera, because otherwise those video cameras get dirty, right? And that's just not something that you would ever think about if you're sitting in the office. Another thing to think about is some of these logistics in terms of how you're running meetings. We like to suggest that teams have everybody stay off mute as their default. Now, obviously that doesn't necessarily work on trash pickup day if there's a lot of noise from someone's house or if there's some construction going on. But having everybody off mute as the default makes it much easier for people who are not in the office to participate on equal footing with people who are in the office. You also want to think through how you call on people if you're running a meeting and some people are in person, some people on video. You don't want to start every time with the people who are on video, and you don't want to end every time with the people who are on video, because that means that they end up as the tiebreaker. So you want to think through those sorts of logistic issues on how you're going to run a meeting. And a great way to do that is just sit down with your team and talk about how you want things to go. You also want to make sure that you're communicating with everybody. So you want to make sure that there isn't just an email list of people who are in the office and a separate one for people who are out of the office. It's better for people to have extra emails than to feel left out or to not know what's going on. So talk about things like scheduling and who's going to be in what day and when meetings are going to be held. You also want to have defaults so that it is not changing constantly, so that people who are hybrid can decide what days they need to be in and have a clear expectation of when they need to be in person. It's also important, I mean, we've learned so much about pivoting over the last year, as sick as we are of hearing that word. But it's important to have check-ins to see how things are working for people and be willing to adjust. Now, with all that said, hopefully that gives you a sense of some of these differences with hybrid teams, and we're going to be digging into these a little more, but let's turn to our 6 strategies. So our first strategy to re-engage and lead a team, whether it's remote or hybrid, is focus on the mission, goals, and values of the organization. So I'd love for you to share in the chat if your workplace has a clear mission, goals, and/or values. Any of those, just share in the chat and let us know so we can have a sense. One really foundational method to get your team engaged and working together more effectively is to focus on the mission, goals, and values of the organization. What are they and why do they matter? Not only can this provide clarity for the whole team, but it's especially important with certain generations. Knowing the mission of the organization is a really critical component of workplace satisfaction for younger members of the workforce. And that starts with Generation X. It becomes more important with millennials, and it's still very important with Generation Z. In fact, 76% of millennials view business as a source of powerful and positive social impact. So this doesn't just apply to people who are working in nonprofits, right? Millennials want to be part of an organization that sees a social role for itself and where employees feel they can contribute to that role. That might be that your organization does paid work that employees can feel like is making a positive social impact. It might be that you do pro bono activities or volunteer days or something else. But however you do it, making social impact part of the mission and actions can really be helpful with engaging the employees, particularly millennials. Now, I talked before about that the strategies I'm sharing with you are things that we use with our clients. So we recently worked with a law firm where there were senior partners and then a group of attorneys and support staff that were about 20 years younger than the senior partners. And that the firm actually, the managing partner wrote an article about the experience of working with us. And she shared, from that standpoint, how just a couple of hours with the team made a big difference in an article that is on the page with the takeaways. So there's a lot of other resources listed there for you. All the books that I'm going to mention and articles I'm going to share with you are all on that page. So it's aposignup.com/teams if you want to check those out. But anyway, so with this firm, there was some disengagement. There was confusion over clear goals. There wasn't always as much communication as there could have been. And just in general, they could have used more clarity. With just a couple of hours working on their vision and the firm leadership being really bought in to wanting to bring everyone together, clearly communicating mission and direction for the firm, the group became much more cohesive team, and it remains so. So how can you do this? Well, you can start by putting together, or at least reviewing if you already have them, the organization's mission statement, annual, quarterly, 5-year goals, and value statement. And if you don't already have those, get the team together to do that. Now, you don't have to be the CEO to do this. It can be that you do this just with your team and put together the mission statement of your team. You can also do values exercises with team members where you work through what do they value, what does the organization value, What does that mean? How does working towards the organization's values support the team members' values? And finally, remember, vision leaks. It is not enough to do this once a year. It is not enough to do this at the quarterly retreat. You need to go back to the mission, goals, and values on a regular basis. Now, the second strategy is to build relationships and trust with and within your team. Throughout 2020, we saw really well-intentioned leaders cancel and shorten team meetings and one-on-ones. And they were doing it to try to free up time because they saw team members were stressed. They were trying to juggle new responsibilities, like trying to get little kids to do e-learning, it's just not always a smooth process, and working within new structures. While that was all intended to be kind on the part of the managers who were canceling those one-on-ones and shortening meetings, and maybe they even thought it would foster loyalty, we've now all seen the impact of reducing face time. So to be blunt, it is not a good strategy to reduce formal and scheduled interactions at the same time that informal conversations at the elevator or the coffee pot are impossible. Your team has to interact with you and with each other in order to stay engaged. Now, I'm not delusional. I understand that it does take more time initially to go back to having longer one-on-ones and to have the sort of formal meeting schedule that you probably had before all of this started. But while it does take more time initially, it saves enormous amounts of time in the long run. And it doesn't have to take hours upon hours. Have any of you read The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team? Okay, so that is a great resource if you're trying to work through some of these issues with your team, and it's a very quick read, and it's on the list of resources for you as well. So I recently had the opportunity to participate in a discussion with the author, Patrick Lencioni, and he was advising that their research shows as little as one team check-in meeting 10 minutes a day, and then alongside a longer team meeting regularly, which either weekly or every other week. That just 10 minutes can be enough to keep your team engaged, but any less than 10 minutes has really negative effects. So to be clear, it requires more than just a few daily check-ins. Excuse me, it requires more than just a few daily check-ins to keep everybody functioning at the right level. But that's a great place to start. To just start having a 10-minute check-in with your team and see how that works out for you. So here are some other ways that you can build relationships and trust with and within your team. You can do things like a personal histories exercise, and that's something that's in the 5 Dysfunctions. It walks you through in more detail how to do that. You can do team effectiveness exercises. You can take personality or behavioral assessments. As I'll mention and talk about a little more in a minute, we really like the EQI 2.0 because that's an emotional intelligence assessment, and that can lead to really helpful conversations among the team members. But there's lots of different ones that you can do. You can do 360s. You can do experiential things with the team. And even though we're not able to necessarily go to a ropes course right now, there still are lots of things that you can do virtually with the team to give everyone that experiential aspect and allow people to build relationships that way. Another thing you can do is team toxin exercise and really talking about some of the issues within teams. And finally, you can do a team charter where you have the group write up the team's charter. Now, these are all good strategies that I understand can take some time and expertise, but another thing that you can do is just use that 3 things exercise that we started off with as a way to just get people talking and building relationships a little bit more personally. And as I mentioned, it is especially helpful to do some of those types of activities if you have people who aren't really excited about having their cameras on. Another strategy is to channel your inner coach and avoid questions that can be answered with one word. So let's do a quick demonstration. I want you to go to the chat and type in what your response would be if I asked you, how are you today? So go ahead and just type that in the chat. Acceptable, fine, doing well, exhausted. Well, how about you? Good. worked outside, got some sun. All right, great. So now, what would your response be if I said, what are you looking forward to this weekend? All right, so you can see just by scanning these, that second question is going to bring out much longer answers that help us build relationships. So use questions that can foster relationships. Now, strategy 3 is to develop your team members' emotional intelligence. Now, 40% of managers identify emotional intelligence and self-awareness as the most important factors that influence whether an employee is engaged. So if you want to increase engagement, developing your team's emotional intelligence can be really effective. So there's 2 great ways to do that. One is to take an emotional intelligence assessment like the EQI 2.0. A book that is really helpful for that is the EQ Edge, and it's also a quick read, has lots of good exercises to work with the team on emotional intelligence. And I wanted to just share a quick example of a team that we worked with where we saw emotional intelligence issues up close and what differences can lead to. So we knew right away that there was something off in how this team related. So we had everyone do the EQI 2.0 and then did individual debriefs with everyone. And that's where we noticed there was a huge divergence in the team members in particular aspects of emotional intelligence, including self-expression and stress tolerance. So it didn't mean that anyone was bad in anything or great in anything. It just meant that people had different levels of self-expression and stress tolerance. And so if you are a leader with a high stress tolerance and you are leading a team where people on the team have a lower stress tolerance, you need to know that some people are going to react differently than you do when there's yet another fire drill, right? And you have to understand that if you have people with lower self-expression, just because they aren't the person who's complaining, that doesn't mean that when they say they're fine, they're actually fine. So that's why doing an emotional intelligence assessment with the team can be really helpful. And like I said, you can also use the EQ Edge or other tools to help people begin to improve in particular areas if that's something they're interested in. Another way to do this is just start a team meeting by asking how everyone handles stress and discussing it. Or you could talk about how everyone is reading emotions while people are wearing masks. So just getting your team talking about emotional intelligence is a great start. So strategy 4 is foster candid communication. So how many of you have read the book Radical Candor? Okay, that's another great one that can be really helpful. We know, research, study after study tells us that communication skills make people better managers, better team leaders, but it's not just communication, it's really clear communication. And candid communication is especially important in managing and re-engaging a remote or hybrid team. So you already know that if people yell at each other a lot, the team could use some work on communication. But in our experience, it's actually the opposite that is more problematic. Now, how many of you have heard the expression Iowa nice or Minnesota nice? All right, so having grown up in Iowa, along with Steve and Keith, and I know some others here today, I prefer Minnesota nice, but in general, the term refers to a veneer of niceness that can hide an undercurrent of passive aggressivity. So the focus on nice is really common in teams where everyone says hello, good morning, meetings never get raucous, nobody yells, and it can all be really well-intentioned, but have destructive effects. So the book Radical Candor points out that people give praise and criticism that's manipulatively insincere when they're too focused on being liked or trying to get a political advantage, or when they're just too tired to care anymore. And then as that quote points out, radical candor can be really helpful in getting people re-engaged with the team, liking their work again, liking their coworkers again. So here are some ways that you can foster radical candor in your team. You can look at the book, Radical Candor. You can embrace conflict. Don't allow it to fester. I know it can be unpleasant, but if you want to be a leader within your team, you need to be willing to address it. Change your own attitude toward feedback. We've seen many times when we're working with teams, if a team leader welcomes feedback, thanks people for giving feedback, it can completely change the tone and make everyone more willing to be honest with each other. You can also do a mining exercise to dig into the issues. We call them skunk on the table exercises when we do them with clients, but get everybody to dig into what the issues are that are under the surface and that no one wants to acknowledge. And give real-time permission. Give people permission to be honest and to disagree and contradict in meetings so that they don't go off and have it fester. And if all of this feels like, oh, I don't know, like, isn't it better to just be polite? Stop and think about if your fly were down or you had spinach in your teeth, would every member of your team tell you? Or would at least one member be too nice to embarrass you? If you have to pause to think about it, your team probably needs to develop radical candor in its communication, and you will see the benefits in terms of the engagement. Let's go to strategy 5, which is invest in your team's development. I mentioned there are so many studies about what makes managers and team leaders successful. One of those is the ability to develop others. Leaders who develop their teams see benefits, including business results, they're viewed more positively by those they lead, and have a better culture that attracts more people to want to work there. So be sure that you're developing your team and members. Give them the tools to succeed and grow. So here's some ideas for you. There are lots of webinars, programs, and books, and a great place to start with webinars is the University of Chicago. There's so many free webinars on the website that you can check out. You also want to ask the team members what they need, but then what they want, but then you need to give them what you need. So because you probably had some of those positions or are going to be involved in promoting your team members, you know what they need to get to the next level. So certainly ask what people want to improve on, but then make sure you're addressing what they need to be able to progress and get where they want to go in their careers. And sometimes that can be coaching for individuals or for the team. Our last strategy is to promote accountability. When teams are remote or hybrid, it can be so easy to let things slide or just lose track of who's doing what. So some strategies that can be really helpful are to have clear goals and standards. And again, people think they want to be accommodating and feel things out and be flexible. People really are better off when you have clear written standards that everybody knows that they're trying to meet. You want to have simple and regular progress reviews. We talked to one team where they told us they're not doing reviews until everyone is in person. So no one will have had reviews for at least at this point, probably a year and a half. That is not a good strategy. Go ahead and do reviews on Zoom. Don't wait until conditions are perfect. Give people feedback. And have team rewards. That can be really helpful, especially with a hybrid team or remote team, to have everybody feel invested in working towards the same goal. So to summarize those 6 strategies, focus on the mission, goals, and values, build relationships and trust, develop your team members' emotional intelligence, foster candid communication, and invest in your team's development. And then finally, promote accountability. So just quickly before we go to questions, I do want to share a couple special considerations for leading on video, because this is something that comes up a lot. So when you're leading a meeting on video, remember that you are setting the tone for everyone else. And unlike a meeting in a conference room, everyone can see you all the time, right? So you want to make sure that you are doing everything you can to look up and at the camera. You also want to make sure that you rethink your background, because as the leader, people are looking at you for cues. I think there was a lot of tolerance, 13 months ago for laundry behind you and things like that. We're at a point where people expect better. So you want to make sure that you are setting the right tone for the team in terms of having the background that you have for your meetings. And you also want to make sure that you're looking only at the meeting. So you want to set the right example for the team. You want to frame yourself. So you want to make sure that you are not chopped off and you're centered in your screen. And exercise caution with the chat. I cannot tell you how many meetings I've been on where someone meant to chat with one person and ended up sending it to everyone. So particularly as a leader within the team, make sure you're exercising caution with that. And as somebody identified when we were talking about virtual meetings, without body language, it can be tricky. So do more to elicit input from people. So even just in your one-on-ones, you can say, I'm getting the sense that you might be feeling whatever it is that right? Or am I off? Or just asking, what do you think about this? How are you feeling about it? Since you can't have all of that body language to use. Now, I'm going to give everybody, I want to show an example. Actually, this is a meeting that we had with two law firm partners, lovely human beings, not too long ago. We can see it was right before Christmas. And one person was on their phone on Zoom because their computer wasn't working and gave up and just flipped their phone down. So it was shooting up at the ceiling so that they could type notes on their computer, which in the moment you totally understand. But remember, if that's the message you're sending your team, that you've just given up, probably not the right message to send, right? And even the person on the bottom, lovely person, great at their job, we're looking mostly at their ceiling. So take a moment to make sure that you are set up so that you can lead most effectively on video. And to help you do that, we're going to take just 60 seconds so that you can improve your Zoom box and try to implement some of these strategies. So I'm going to start the timer and we'll give you just 60 seconds to make some adjustments to how you're showing up. You have 30 seconds remaining. I see some people moving furiously. All right. Got 15 seconds left. I'm going to go ahead and stop the share though. All right. So I don't know about you, but I can see some differences already with some people. So I want to just encourage you to take that 60 seconds next time you go to log on with your team. Take 60 seconds and adjust it, because hopefully, as you've now seen, you actually can make a difference in how you're showing up on Zoom with just a few seconds. So I encourage you to do that, because again, you're sending a message to the team and setting the tone for the team. One note on virtual backgrounds, a lot of people always ask about that. There have been studies that show that it actually decreases trust. So your employer may require virtual backgrounds, but if they don't, I encourage you to not use one unless you're just in a situation where you absolutely have to use one, which we know happens sometimes, right? So, okay, let's go to a whiteboard. This is another great tool to get people involved, but I do want to caution you that if you're using a whiteboard with your team, depending on the settings of the host, everybody may be able to see who types what. So the way to use a whiteboard, if you haven't already done this, is hopefully you see where it says that you're seeing my screen. If you go up next to that and click on the red part next to that, go down and click on annotate. And when you click on annotate, will that just disappear for you all? All right, go down and click on annotate, and then it should give you a text bar. And you just click on the T for text, and that'll allow you to type somewhere on the screen. And I'd just like to invite you to share what has been most valuable for you from our 50 minutes together today. And if you have any questions, we definitely have a few minutes to address those as people put in their comments. So let's see. Innovative ways to engage, which I was not aware of. Great, good. It looks like some folks are seeing how they can use the drawing tool, which is great. If you don't want to draw though, and you're thinking, how do I do this? Just click on the T for text and that'll let you type. If you're like I am, the thought of trying to draw is not appealing to you. Although we actually do, with some of our groups, we'll sometimes do little art breaks during workshops and things, which can be really fun. So with that, go ahead and type in any takeaways you have. Candid communication resource, lots of tips to try. Strategies for building relationships, Candor, 6 strategies. Like the scavenger hunt for breaking the ice. Good.
And Amy, we've had a few questions through the chat, so maybe I'll share those in our last 5 minutes here.
Sure.
Going back to that scavenger hunt idea, we had 2 questions about that. One, how do you tie it to the topic of the meeting so that it kind of makes sense, or should you at all? Then what do you do if the culture at work is a little bit more professional, maybe a little bit less fun and open to this kind of thing?
Yeah, so I would say, I mean, we we work with, like I said, law firms, Fortune 200 companies. Obviously, some of these things, you might think, oh gosh, like, am I going to use these with a bunch of people who wear suits to work and people who are still wearing business casual, even though they could be wearing yoga pants? And what we found is they do work. Certainly, you know, sharing a takeaway from a meeting, like, that's completely professional, right? Would I do an art break with that group? Probably not. And I think some of it is everybody is at home, right? So even though the environment where you work may be more formal, that can cause a disconnect between what people are really living if they have a 6-year-old trying to do e-learning next to them and they're trying to do their work. So you can also think about, could you use some of these techniques for you know, a coffee break, right? You know, 4 o'clock on Friday, nobody's working anyway. Have everybody hop on Zoom and have some fun. There's lots of different games you can do. What is it, Kazooks? I'm sure this is, or Quizlet. There's lots of different games that you can do with people. But I encourage you to try it and just say, we're going to do a beta today. We're going to do a pilot. Let's try this and see what happens. And I think you'll see that that can really help people warm up. In terms of the 3 things, yes, that's why I picked something that relates to how you feel about remote work. So the third one, the one that people discuss, you do want to be related to the topic, and so people can get talking.
And then you mentioned a team toxin exercise. We had a question about that. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so that's something that we do where people may be having some difficulties with the team. So we'll talk about things that might feel like toxins. Let me just get this up here so people have the information. That things like distrust or communication difficulties. So what you do is you look at what might be the issues in your team and then have people work through those. So it might be that you have a discussion about conflict and how are we managing conflict. We do a lot of different exercises where we use different tools that might be a little more complicated for the average manager to just jump into, but starting with talking and discussing can be a great place to start. And if you, like I said, if you go to that aposignup.com/teams, you can schedule a free call with me or with my partner, Keith, and we'll walk through with you, like, this is, you tell us what's wrong, we'll tell you what exercise we think might be helpful. So that might be the best way to go about that.
And we'll do one last question here before we sign off from Jessica about virtual backgrounds. She says, I work for myself and the teams I lead change based on the project work I get. I usually start with a virtual background when I've never met someone before, a potential client, and then move to no virtual background when I know that the team, you know, knows me well enough. What are your thoughts there?
I think it actually should be the opposite, really, right? So we know that having a virtual background makes people less likely to trust you right off the bat. And particularly when you're new to a team and need to build trust, I think letting them see a little bit more about you might be helpful. And I understand completely, like, people have different situations. I have one client where the only place he can work is from the baby's changing table while the baby is at daycare. And so his wife actually painted a mural above the baby's crib. So nobody knows that he is standing at a diaper changing table with a crib behind him, right? I completely get that it calls for some creativity and these things don't always work. But if you can, starting with your regular background is a quicker way to build trust with your team.
I had a meeting with someone who was sitting on the floor in her closet because it was the only place she could escape her kids. So we've all been there. We know it well.
Yes. I mean, give your colleagues grace, give yourself grace, right? But if you can, try to avoid the virtual backgrounds, particularly until you get to know people.
Wonderful. Well, it is 1 o'clock Central Time here in Chicago. So that closes our meeting. Amy and Keith, thank you both so much for facilitating this great gathering. I'm so grateful that everyone took an hour out of their day today to spend it with you, Chicago, and to work on yourself. We're grateful for that. I dropped a link in the chat to a survey. I'd love to share any kudos that you have with Amy following this session, and any feedback that you have on what we can be doing better as a community. That would be great. And then I will send a recording email as well as a quick recap doc later this afternoon so that you can catch up on anything that you missed from this session. And we're seeing a lot of thanks in the chat. And Amy, I echo that. What a wonderful session. Thank you all.
Thank you all for joining us. Have a great afternoon. Bye.